In progress.
Hi there. Hi, Jack.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good. I'm looking forward to. I love it when something gets cancelled, and then when you get to the, when it finally happens. It's that weird foible of mine. I'm always satisfied, And obviously, it's happening all the time right now.
Yeah.
So, and hopefully Ruth will be joining us in a minute. I haven't heard otherwise. Let me just check my email just in case.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have been able to make the last appointment, so it's a happy chance for me.
Great.
I've literally just heard the news. My niece has just given birth this morning, and I've been supporting her through her pregnancy the whole way. So I'm feeling quite emotional.
I bet you are. Is that the first one of that next generation, or are there more already?
Actually, it's of the next generation of my family. That's the 8th.
Oh wow! Plenty.
Yeah, right. I've got a big family. I've got 24 nieces and nephews. So
wow.
Yeah, and they've just all got to birthing age. It's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. That's so nice. I love a big family. So beautiful. Yeah. Oh, congratulations! Oh, lovely news, Audrey. Hopefully we're not going to have, we've had quite a few sort of majestic time fuck-ups with international speakers. I hope it's going to, I hope she's going to be here shortly. We'll see, hopefully. If not, we might all have to come back in an hour. Because, because we've got the British summertime +1, right? Or the GMT +1. It might have gone awry for her, but we'll see. How are you feeling, Charlie? Feeling better a little bit? You look well.
Yeah, much better, thank you. Yeah, getting on with it now. Drinking apple juice, feeling good. It's all good.
Good. It's such a, it's another one of those things that happen. It's our most common surgery. Like, and how do we not all bloody learn about that at school? Like, to look after our liver.
I don't know anybody else who's had it.
I bet you do,
Yeah.
Because honestly, ever since it's happened to Salim, every time I mention it, there's hi. There's so many people that will say, yeah, I've had that done. The cab driver on the way and on the way back to the hospital last time he went in, both of them had their gallbladders out.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible.
I've still got mine for now.
Yeah, well, you can keep it, you can if you can commit. It's just because a lot of people can't commit to not eating kebabs and whatever else.
Yeah.
Rosie, everyone's turning up apart from our star. So I'm going to just send her a message.
She's going to do a grand entrance.
Right, let me just message her just in case we have gone wrong with the time. We had Ramiro was on at like midnight instead of midday. Hi Rosie, look at your hair, that's lovely. I'm just messaging Ruth, there she is. Oh, hold on, she's there. I'm not going to message her. Coming in. Great, hi Kay, morning. Headphones, I love everyone's little areas they have. Good morning, Serena. Hello. Oh, good. We've got a nice worldwide gathering. I like this. How are you doing, Ruth? Uh-oh. There we go. You froze for a moment then. We'll give a few minutes for everyone to get in that's coming, and then I'll start grilling you. Gently.
Sorry.
Mystery tea. Do you ever have bags of herb tea and you haven't got a clue what it is lurking in your cupboards? I've decided I'm going to start drinking them. From 20 years ago. I have a random North African one. Smells nice. Got roses in it. It's my mission. Use up all the fabric, use up all the old tea, use up all the old bits of conditioner. That's the worst thing for me with all these daughters, all these little tiny little bits of hair products left.
Yeah.
Funny. I should just force them all to use like olive oil or something really old school. Butter. Butter only in your hair. Right, let's just begin. I'll let them in as they come. Ruth, it's so good that you're here. Hello. So let me tell you what we're doing. Basically, we invite in guest teachers all the time anyway, but I thought over lockdown, we could have these kind of hour-ish sessions because none of us like to be on the computer too much. And I really wanted to expose everyone to the people that I've been exposed to that have helped, you know, shape me. And so basically I'm just inviting all my friends in and having like fantasy dinner party, which we could do one evening actually. That would be fun, wouldn't it? Or it might be a lunch. Lunch for someone, dinner party for someone else. So far we've had, who have we had? Liliana Lammers, Michelle O'Donnell's partner. Who else have we had? Rachel Reed. Have we managed to have anybody else yet? Because we've got the list, haven't we? That's it, isn't it, so far? And then we had Ramiro, didn't we, last year from Colombia. He did a session on where life meets death, or birth meets death, which was wonderful, right? I'm still like really reeling from when he was talking about in the Musqua people, the mother has to go to the realm of death to pick up her baby, you know, her baby's soul, and it's great. I should send you the recording, you'll enjoy it.
I would love to hear that, see that. Thank you.
It was great. I mean, you know, it's in Spanish, right? And we have somebody translating, so it's probably a little bit longer than the other sessions, but he's hilarious because normally in ceremony, you know, you pass around the bottle of liquor with the herbs in, right? And because that's his tradition and that's how you tell the stories and do your teaching, but he's on his own and he drinks the whole bottle. So the end is, you know, you got to really get with the indigenous vibe, but he's absolutely mash up at the end of the session. But it's great. He still does his job. But yeah, I'll send it to you so you can have a look. So they're the people we brought in. It's like I want to really have a mix, you know, of like obviously we had the professor of midwifery in the institution and then the one in the Cosmos, right? It was Ramiro, was the other style. So I like to think of you as being a bit in the middle. So maybe you'd share your story with us and that'd help everyone understand why I think that. Would that be okay?
Well, I mean, you might have to guide me a little bit in why you think that. But I suppose, I'll just introduce myself and share a little bit of my story, and I suppose how I came to walk this path of being a birth attendant. So my story begins with my mother, and I suppose all our birth stories begin with our mothers.
Absolutely.
So I was actually born in Switzerland. I was born in Europe. And the reason I was born there is because, at that stage here in South Africa, we still were under apartheid. And my parents were a mixed race couple. So my father was white, my mother was a woman of color. And it was illegal for them to be together. And it was certainly illegal for them to have a child. And so my mother was able to secure refugee status in Switzerland. And so I was born there, and I was actually the first in many generations to be born in hospital. So in our family, it was traditional to be born at home. And at that stage, actually here in South Africa, it was very much the norm for women of color to still be birthing at home. White women were birthing in hospital, but we still actually had bicycle midwives here attending in black and colored and Indian communities. So I'm kind of the broken link in that. But I mean, I think still, my mother very much still instilled in me warm feelings about my birth story. And I know that, you know, she had to birth on her own. She was induced, and at the time she was holding onto this little green statue, just somewhere here. I can't quite see it. That was her doula. You know, she said that was her doula, and that was her connection back to Africa. That's what she held on to. And I'm one of 4 girls. 2 of us were born in Switzerland, and then the other 2 were born here in South Africa. We were able to move back to South Africa again once they got rid of the Immorality Act. There was actually such a thing. And yeah, and then moved to a rural part of South Africa. So we lived very far from anything. I think it was like an hour on a very bumpy dirt road to the nearest town. And yeah, so we kind of lived communally on this piece of land, no electricity. I think initially no running water. Eventually we had running water, but you know, I grew up cooking on fires. It was very my mother's intention at the time was to really bring her children back to their roots, and to connect us with our culture again. Because I think part of, you know, she actually ended up living in Switzerland for 20 years, and she was definitely seeing that we weren't quite. She said she couldn't quite see Africa in us. She really wanted to have that imprint, us to have that imprint. And even, I mean, it was a very difficult transition initially. At first it was a fun adventure, and then it was kind of like, oh, this is actually our reality. And I mean, Switzerland is quite an extreme difference to rural South Africa at that time. And I mean, at that stage when we bought the farm, farmers were still paying wages to the farm workers at the end of the day in alcohol, which is called the DOP system. So it was still, you know, I mean, we were really in full apartheid still, and also being people of color, buying land, trying to farm, all of that. We were quite not under like direct physical attack, but definitely it was a very difficult thing to be doing at that time. I mean, my mother had a social work background and a psychology background. She was a strong feminist. She'd always run women's groups, especially for women of color, in the UK and South Africa and in the US. So I grew up in those circles. I'd very much grown up in these circles of women sharing and crying and expressing themselves. And she very much did the same thing when she started to become a farmer. So even though we were farming protea, South Africa's national flower, for her it was really important to be uplifting, especially the lives of the women and children at that time. I mean, South African farm wages are shocking still to this day, but at the time they were, I mean, yeah, that was really, and women were getting paid half of what men were getting paid, and children were working as well. So she really tried to improve living conditions, really tried to make sure that women were more empowered in their situations, that children could access schooling. And one of the things that she really wanted to make sure of was that women were receiving proper antenatal care and able to access a place to birth. I mean, at that stage, most women were birthing at home or on the side of the road or wherever it was. So the women that were living on the farm at that stage were of Bushman descent or Khoi descent, so the traditional people of South Africa. And yeah, and it was an interesting juxtaposition of like beautiful folklore and real connection to nature and songs and dance, and then the other extreme of extreme alcoholism and abuse that took place towards women and children especially. And I mean, I think a weekend never went by in our entire history of having the farm, which we had for 20 years, that we didn't have a woman or a child that had been beaten on a weekend. So that was kind of became the norm. And I mean, I remember being about 12 years old and being alone on the farm, and a man knocking on the door, and somebody had hit him on the head with a beer bottle, and he had all this glass embedded in his head. And I mean, usually the fights were about once the alcohol had run out. That was usually what the fight was over. And I had a friend with me from Cape Town who was completely freaked out about this man with blood dripping down. But for me, it was normal. At that point, it was, I knew how to use the first aid kit, and I got the tweezers out, and I just made him a cup of tea, sat him down, and started to pick glass out of his head and waited for the ambulance to arrive. So yeah, so there were these two extremes that we were living side by side with. But every single mother who lived on the farm had lost a child, had lost a baby. We had a graveyard on the farm, and it was a traditional Bushman graveyard, so they have a very specific way of creating their graves with rocks. And yeah, basically every mother could tell a story of a child that they had lost. And so yeah, this was obviously something that my mother wanted to remedy. And so yeah, try to make sure that women accessed good antenatal care at that point. I mean, malnutrition was definitely an issue at that stage as well. Yeah, so then what would happen is that then if a woman went into labor as well, then my mother would provide transport for her to be able to access the local hospital, if that's what she wanted to do. And yeah, but I don't think it was ideal for those women. I mean, being basically seen as the lowest of the low culturally in the country at the time, treatment probably wouldn't have been very good. And and it happened one night that there was a young mother who went into labor. She was about 23 years old. Her name was Hester. And at that, we had people who lived permanently on the farm, maybe about 10 or 15 families. And then we had seasonal people who came. So people who came to live there for a particular flower season, and then they would move on to the next farm. And again, it was very traditional. They would arrive with donkey and cart, and they'd even on the back of their cart have all their building material to set up their home. And they would set up their home for those few weeks or months or whatever it was, and then take it all down again and then move on to the next place. So this particular family was one of those people. And they actually ended up setting up right at the bottom of the farm. So, I mean, in South Africa, our farms are massive. They're hectares, thousands of hectares, and ours was 2,500 hectares. It had 7 mountains on it. Just to get to the bottom of the farm where they were was another hour's drive. Also on this very bumpy dirt road, you needed a truck to get there. And when this mother arrived, she was quite heavily pregnant, and so my mother approached her and spoke to her about the fact that that there was this system in place now for the women. And this mother kind of thanked her, but very actually politely declined that she wouldn't be going to hospital. And she was a first-time young mother, so I think my mother, I remember her saying something along the lines of, well, you'll see how you feel when you're in labor. And and then one evening, my mother got word that this mother had gone into labor. I mean, I still wonder how word got passed around, actually. I mean, they were an hour away. It was pouring with rain. There was no cell phone reception. There still isn't cell phone reception there. And there weren't cell phones at that stage anyway. But anyway, my mother got word about this, and because she'd felt that mother's reticence about going to hospital, she just threw a few supplies into a bag and drove down to the bottom of the farm to where this mother was. And it was pouring with rain. It was the middle of the winter. It was the middle of the night. And actually even had to drive through rivers to get there. And it's this tiny little old stone cottage, which is probably tinier than my bedroom, the whole little house itself. And it doesn't even have proper windows. They're boarded up. And she arrived there, and the husband opened the door, and he was quite anxious, quite nervous. And he just kind of withdrew into the next room, and my mother saw that this mother was in quite strong labor already in kind of the main little room, and there was a little fire in the corner. It was very warm and cozy, and a little mattress on the floor, but otherwise very bare and very, yeah, not much there. And yeah, it was clear that this mother was, not getting up or wanting to go anywhere. So my mother decided to stay and just sit with her, and just, I suppose, just followed an intuition around what was needed there. The father was quite anxious, so my mother just got him to boil water, which is still the best midwives trick to give anxious people to do. Just go boil it. Go find all the big pots in the house and just bring them to the boil.
And keep them boiling.
Yeah, exactly. Just keep an eye on those pots. It's a very good occupation. Yeah, and I think she had some instruments there, and she had this knitting cotton that she'd still brought from Switzerland, and that actually always ended up being her umbilical cord ties. But she decided to boil some of that. And so she kind of moved between the mother and the father, and just was kind of a quiet presence there. And then at some point there was a knock on the door, and there was another man who'd walked kilometers in the rain. I think his name was Willem. And he had come because he'd heard that Hester was in labor, and he knew my mother was inexperienced to help her, and he had caught all 4 of his children. So he considered himself to be a bit of an expert. So he was here now to help. But he knew that he couldn't come into direct contact with this woman because she wasn't his wife. So he was going to sit with the father. So I suppose he was a bit of a dad doula, actually. That's kind of the role that he ended up playing. So he sat with the father, and then my mother would sit with the mother, and then she'd come back, and he would kind of tell her, whether everything was on track. And then at some point, it felt like birth was imminent, but something just wasn't quite feeling right to my mother. So she went to Willem and she asked him, she just said, like, something's not feeling quite right here. Do you have a sense of what's going on? And he said, yes, you're right. It is feeling different. This baby is coming bum first. It's breech. So it's interesting that he was able to sense that from the next room. And so he directed my mother on how to turn the baby in labor as birth was about to happen. And she did it. And the baby was born very soon afterwards. Went straight onto the chest of the mother, started suckling the breast, placenta plopped out. I think my mother still offered to take her to hospital if that's still what she wanted. And she said, no, thank you. The mother did tear, but my mother did have suturing skills because of all the fights we had on the farm. So she was able to stitch her up. And yeah, they stayed for the rest of the flower season, and then moved on to the next farm. But yeah, basically what happened as a consequence of this birth is that every woman in the farm and surrounds refused to go to hospital after that, and they started to call my mother in labor. So I called her the accidental midwife because she definitely didn't ask for it, but it definitely called her. And so yeah, so then I ended up growing up with my mother having this. At the time, I thought it was a bit of a weird hobby because it wasn't her primary thing that she was doing. She was farming, she was parenting, she was still running other things, yeah. And then every once in a while, she'd be called out in the middle of the night, and there would be a baby born. They were twins as well. There was also another mother who arrived very heavily pregnant, and my mother still commented on the fact that it looked like she was carrying a rugby team in there. And with that particular birth story, I think by then my mother was like already super chilled about it all. And my 2 younger sisters remember that birth because I think they got wind of it and came to tell my mother about it. And this was at a house that was actually much closer, maybe like a half an hour walk. And so they knew that this woman was in labor, and they were just so excited. And apparently my mother took forever to get ready. Like it was torturous for them because she just like was very slowly packing her bags. I think she still like washed the dishes. She still like finished a meal. It was a whole preparation thing. and then walked very slowly up the hill to where the birth was happening, with my sisters running up and down, telling her to hurry up. And then with that particular birth, it was during the day, and apparently the entire kitchen was just crowded with children who were just so curious about this birth. And my mother was in the room with the mother and two other women from the farm. And then a baby was born, and it was all lovely and fine. And then they were waiting for the placenta, and another baby popped out. And so that was the first twin birth she attended. So it just was this very normal thing that kind of was happening in the background, but I realize in retrospect that it kind of, through indirect osmosis, it allowed for me to have a very normal imprint of what birth was and how it worked and how to be at birth. And and kind of life just went on with this kind of happening in the background. And like I said, I never really paid it proper attention, actually, except when I fell pregnant when I was 20. It was just very normal that my mother would be the person who would attend me in labor. I mean, that's what I knew. And I think because I was such a young mother, I hadn't really had peers yet who had maybe had different birthing experiences, or had shared different things around childbirth. So it was just very normal that my mother would attend me in labor. And I wasn't living on the farm at that point. I was living much further away, but also on a farm. So my mother just said to me, well, just go once a month to the local clinic. So I would just queue up with the other mamas and just have my blood pressure taken, and they would test my urine and then palpate my belly. And I mean, they were still listening with the pinard, and I think I heard my baby's heart rate once. So towards the end, I think they'd gotten this Doppler. It was this exciting new tool that they had. And so I think at like 38 weeks or 36 weeks or something, I heard my baby's heartbeat for the first time myself. Yeah, and then I went into labor, and I called my mum, and she came and she sat with me in labor. And I moaned and groaned and complained my way through this experience. And then at some point gave birth to a boy who was placed on my chest, and then my mother fell asleep at my feet, and then woke up a few hours later and said something along the lines of, I think we need to do something about this placenta. And so then I birthed the placenta, and she checked me for tears, which I didn't have, and and I think we did cut the cord kind of like the next day, because it was irritating. My dog kept sniffing it, but we hadn't cut the cord at all. And I think the next day we weighed the baby by tying him in a blanket and weighing him with a fish scale that we found in the barn. And he was 11 pounds, which I didn't know what that really meant. Only years later did I find out that was actually quite a big baby.
Definitely.
But it was that particular birth experience that made me go, because before that I wanted to perform, I wanted to be an actress and a singer and do all that kind of thing. And then I had my first birthing experience, and having my mother there in the way that she was there, and the incredible, just how amazing I felt afterwards, and how in love I felt with my baby, and just so empowered, even though it had been labor. I mean, we know labor's not easy. I was like, wow, is this what she's been doing all of these years? That's what I want to do. This is the coolest job on the planet, actually. And so that's when my path, I suppose, kind of really, that's when I decided to step onto the path. And it took me a long time to find and navigate my way through it. I mean, I had 3 more children after that. So I'm the mother of 4 children. They were all born at home. And I was very clear that I didn't want to go the whole nursing midwifery training route, which is kind of the only official form of training that happens here in South Africa. And traditional midwifery here has very much been repressed. I mean, the apartheid government did a very good job of annihilating culture here. And I'd say, like in the last 20 years, there's just been a revitalizing of that. But I mean, I've been to other African countries where traditional midwifery has been much more alive. Like even through colonization, there's definitely still there's a tradition of that, like Zimbabwe, Malawi, Kenya. I was able to go and visit and meet and speak to traditional midwives there, whereas here it's been much harder to connect with that actually. But I did want to hold a qualification. Like I kind of wanted to be in a place where I could kind of come in a little bit as an expert and not just be. So I wanted to be in a similar place. I wanted to kind of practice like my mother, but still hold a qualification. And so in the end, what I did do was an apprenticeship-based midwifery training through the States, the North American Registry of Midwives. So I'm a certified professional midwife in the States, which is a midwifery qualification which specializes in home and out of hospital. But I did all my apprenticing here in South Africa. So at the time we set up something called the African Pilot Project through the North American Registry of Midwives. So there were about 10 of us who really wanted to become midwives, but wanted to find a different route. And I mean, it took like 10 years to set that up, and then it was another 4 years of training before I could actually call myself a midwife. And actually in South Africa, I'm still not allowed to call myself a midwife because the title of midwife is owned by the South African Nursing Council. You have to be a midwife. You have to be a nurse in order to call yourself a midwife. And so here in South Africa, I am registered as a traditional birth attendant. We do have that. Thankfully now, post-apartheid, there are laws and groups and support around resurrecting our traditions. And so I'm actually part of the Traditional Doctors Union, which is kind of the umbrella body for all traditional healers. So traditional midwives, traditional doctors, traditional healers, your iklicha, which is your kind of a traditional herbal doctor, sangomas, which is more what I suppose people would have called a witch doctor. You even have traditional surgeons. So we all fall under that particular umbrella. Laws are still in process, but because there's so many of us, actually, we're quite well protected, actually. And it's been quite wonderful. It's been actually a very wonderful way to practice, because for about 2 years initially, I was kind of very much practicing under the radar and word of mouth and all of that. But there was a level of anxiety that came with that, obviously, because
no one wants to go to jail in South Africa, right?
No one wants to go to jail for attending birth. Like it just seems wrong.
It is wrong.
And so when that came around, when I met Chief Kutela, I made contact with Chief Kutela, and he was so happy to hear that there were a group of us who were wanting to really visit this whole traditional midwifery story. And so he was really happy to bring us on board. But subsequently, we have found about 60 traditional midwives that have been working kind of underground, under the radar here in South Africa, like proper granny midwives, and they're attending breaches, twins at home. There are quite a few refugee traditional birth attendants as well, because a lot of the refugees are very reticent to access antenatal care, hospitals, because of how they get treated, but also the possibility of being deported. And so, and often they come from strong traditions of birthing at home anyway, so don't have a trust in the medical model anyway. So yeah, there's Somalian and Malawian and Zimbabwean traditional birth attendants here. I've had the honor of working with a few of them. They're really, really lovely, lovely women. And then I also attend births of quite a few refugees now as well. There's a informal settlement near where I live where, yeah, I've just been lucky enough to connect with a group of women there, and every few months one of them wants to birth at home, and then I attend those births. And then otherwise I'm attending births all around Cape Town of all sorts of women who want to birth at home. So yeah, that's me. That's my introduction.
That's a great story. Such a great story. We'll look forward to your book one day, Ruth. The big thick one, not the mini one.
Not the mini one, yeah.
The big thick one of all the stories. I'm so glad you said that, because I was like literally sat here with my heart in my shoes, like they're the oldest people in the world, the Khoisan, the Zulu, the Xhosa, all of these people in South Africa, and how fucking awful for them to have lost their midwifery traditions. So there's always secret women, isn't there? Always secret women. No, it's wonderful to hear that. And I see that they're trying to build an Amazon on the Khoisan land, an Amazon warehouse. So all of you go Google and sign that petition. So they are the oldest people in the world, right? I know that we do that all the time in the world and say, we've got the oldest tree and we've got the oldest, but I'm pretty sure the Khoisan are.
The original people, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
and you can feel it. You can really feel it. I mean, it's just, I mean, you know, the alcoholism and the violence, you know, that have crept in, obviously has had an impact. But when you really tap into the very, very ancient culture and that connection with the land and the songs and the stories, and I just still feel so grateful, I suppose, to my mother for placing us in these situations at such a young age, because I grew up, my fireside tales were the stories of these people and the dances and the songs that they would sing, and yeah, it's those stories and the songs and the dances, because it has that repetitive trance-like feel, it just really takes you, and it really puts you in touch with the land. And even when I go into those mountains nowadays, I can feel it. They really helped to put us in touch with that. Yeah.
Well, we go back far enough, we're all going back to that direction, right? If you don't know that already, go off and I tell you what I'm watching at the moment, Ancient African Civilizations, Henry Louis Gates. It's absolutely incredible. I'd highly recommend. He's one of my favorite academics anyway. But yeah, we all need to look back, right, to go forwards, and we're better than the oldest people in the world, most definitely. So I'm going to allow the, questions from the floor, because I'm in danger of monopolizing you most. Definitely. One thing that I'd love you to tell us, though, even if not now, like afterwards, is if we can help in any way, right, with the work that you're doing over there, let us know.
Thank you.
So who's got questions for my buddy Ruth? She just like stunned you into like, I wish I could have had a midwife like that. I wish I could be a midwife like that. Feelings.
I have a question. Hi.
Audrey.
Hi, Nicola. Hi, Ruth. I also grew up in South Africa, so listening to you talk, fair enough, I did not grow up on a farm. I grew up in Pretoria. However, you've just made me very homesick. And all my friends still live probably quite close to where you are. But what I have seen over the years is how medicalised the South African maternity system is. And I'm interested to know the move back towards home birth more, or not really. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the medicalization of childbirth in South Africa is out of hand, actually. And we have in the private sector, we have a cesarean rate which is on par with one in Brazil, for example. So we have two healthcare systems actually that take place here in South Africa, and the one is the National Health Service, which is kind of for the general population, and I suppose would be more like the UK's NHS. And then we have a private healthcare system, which is very much like the American private healthcare system. And the private healthcare system sprung out of a fear when apartheid ended of white people now having to share their healthcare, because before that it was a national healthcare system, and obviously the white people got the best one, and then the colored and Indian people kind of got the middle one, and then the black people got the worst one, because black people weren't even considered to be citizens of South Africa. They were illegally here, and that's why they had to carry those pass books around. And so there was this fear of now having to share the national healthcare system. And so these private institutions cropped up, and they're through these quite expensive private insurance companies. And now it's kind of, you know, your upper middle class, I suppose, is what really accesses that. So it is now more diverse in terms of its the color of people that access it. But it's definitely insurance run. So the decision making that takes place around childbirth is a high intervention one, in the same way as it would be in the United States. And there's definitely no midwifery care in there. It's all doctor run. And so, you know, you have it being very much the norm and being paid for by insurance companies, the choice to have an elective Caesar. And I know every single year, the biggest outlay of our insurance companies here in South Africa is on cesareans. And at some point, I think about 2 years ago, they scrapped you being able to just have an elective Caesar. But nowadays, they just come up with a medical reason to have that elective Caesar. So it hasn't really changed the statistics. It's just changed the fact that it's a non-emergency Caesar to find, you know, creating a medical reason for it. So yeah, in the private healthcare sector, you're probably looking at a cesarean rate upward of 50%, and that's a good cesarean rate in the private sector. Some places it's 100%. I mean, I've have obstetric nurse friends who have said, well, the hospital I work in practices vaginal bypass. That's what they do.
Vaginal bypass.
Yeah, or I work at Caesar's Palace, you know. That's what they call the hospital that they work at. I remember phoning around to the private hospitals to find out what their cesarean rates were. And yeah, it was at that stage, that was about 10 years ago, it was upward of 65%, and some were between 80 and 100. So that's the private sector. And then in public, you are looking at about a cesarean rate of about 30%, which is still not ideal, but it is better than in our private sector. I mean, in the public sector, there are midwives that are attending, nurse midwives that are attending the births. So here in the Western Cape, in the coloured and black areas, we have what we call midwife obstetric units. So they're sort of like satellite stations where women go and have all their antenatal care done, and that's where they go in labour. So it's what they call for low risk women. And then, so it's the same as having a home birth, actually, in the sense of, you know, who's attending, what equipment is available, what's possible to do in those places. And then if there's an emergency, they get transferred to a primary hospital. There are a few of those around the city, and that's what I access as well, in case of a transfer. So I'm basically using the same paperwork and system as the midwife obstetric units. And then if I need to transfer, I transfer to the public healthcare system. But yeah, I mean, actually, that's how Nicola and I met, is because I run the home birth groups here in Cape Town, and then I visited in Edinburgh. I don't know when it was, a long time ago.
That baby must be really big now. I was thinking.
Yeah. It was for my niece's birth, and then my sister-in-law took me along to one of Nicola's gatherings, and that's when we met back there, all the way back then. And yeah, so I've been running home birth gatherings here in Cape Town for many, many years. And in the beginning, it was definitely, you know, a certain type of person that was coming, and it was quite radical. And whereas now, I definitely find there's many more people across the board who are making this choice. And definitely a lot of Muslim families are that is their choice for birth. I mean, primarily because then they know that who's in attendance, and it'll be a woman. But it's been really, really wonderful to be able to support in those communities. And I've been it's been so beautiful. It's really, really been so beautiful to support in the Muslim communities, because there's just such an honoring actually of the process and the 40 days after birth, and really allowing the birth to unfold naturally as it needs to, and men really honoring that, like really having a deep respect and honoring of that, and not making it about themselves, really holding space for it. So it's been really, really wonderful.
It's been
So yeah,
quite
I
a
think it depends.
revolution in the Muslim communities with birth in South Africa rather. It seems like quite a sort of almost like a revolutionary time with the people that I know. I know we shouldn't have favorite communities, but they are my favorite one. Because the women are so organized, you know, and they're so supportive, and the way they structure their businesses, everything is just it's exceptional. And we had friends in Johannesburg, and she just taught me like quite a lot, because she'd had these 4 daughters and been absolutely brutalized, even though she was kind of middle class and wealthy enough to have something other than that. And then she was having this last one, and you know, she was just in despair at having to go through it a 5th time, you know, and it was just, and I was determined, you know, to help her find a midwife. The baby's about 15 now, maybe. And we managed to find a birth center and a midwife, and she had all her women there singing devotional songs around the birth pool, and her man in the corner, her husband in the corner, and he rang us afterwards, just crying his eyes out about the difference, you know, and how important it is to have birth like that. And I'm watching it change in that community. So I would love to think about you supporting them and helping them. It's wonderful. Because there's such a lot of brutalization, isn't there? I've worked with a fair few South African Muslim women here, actually, that have had a really awful time, you know, with previous births in the state and the private sector. It's crazy.
Yeah, so I do end up attending quite a lot of VBACs at home as a result of the high medicalization of childbirth here in South Africa. So I think what tends to happen is that lovely, naive, first-time mother goes to her obstetrician and trusts the process, as we should be able to. And then gets told, and I mean, you know, we all know how it works. You know, you go for that first ultrasound and you get told, something, this and this and that. I don't know, your feet are very small, or the placenta is a little bit low, or your baby's a little bit small, or your baby's a little bit big, or your amniotic fluid is this, or I don't know, whatever it is, whatever that. Like I've actually I can even tell sometimes which doctor they're talking about by what they got told. And usually then at 38 weeks, they want to induce. Now, I don't know, there was some study that came out that says it's much better to induce at 38 weeks. And
that's from here. This is from Edinburgh. So you can tell everybody, right? This is because everywhere I go now, it's like, oh, Edinburgh, yeah, the Edinburgh induction study, thanks. So Edinburgh,
like the Canadian breach study, hey?
Yes, it is, exactly. So the kind of spanner in the works with that bit of research here is, you know, we're in Edinburgh, which has huge amounts of substance misuse, right? So if you look at the population of Edinburgh birthing, it does look better to bring bring everybody early, because there are many poorly babies in our cohort, right? So actually, individually, of course, we know that's bullshit, but that's how that bit of research looks like. It's better to induce everyone at 38, isn't it? Or 37.
It is 38.
Yeah.
Thank you for that context. That's really helpful. I appreciate that. There's always context, hasn't there?
There is always, and we're worse. So we're in the train spotting area, right? And train spotting days were really bad, right? Late 80s, early 90s. We're in a worse situation now than we were then, but it's all just kind of managed better and hidden away, so we don't realise as residents of Edinburgh, unless you go into the schemes or where the needle exchange is or whatever. Yeah, so that's basically it. And it's not actually just a kind of working class issue. Like, we've got a lot of middle class women knocking back the wine, but that's seen as acceptable alcoholism, unfortunately, but that's also an issue for us here too. So yeah, So sorry to sidetrack, but it pisses me
No,
off.
it's valuable information. I always like also being able to learn that I'm not just the one who's
Oh no, and you know, for us here, what happens is all of a sudden, 1 week, I'll just get loads and loads of calls and emails and texts because everyone's baby will be too small, too big. Yeah, oh, you're all that bullshit, too small feet, whatever. And then all of a sudden, oh, everybody needs to be induced because they're doing another bit of research. Or the latest thing they were trialing was misoprostol. Great.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because obviously they need to, you know, be able to just pop a tablet, and that's so much easier. But
So is that is that for induction of
yeah,
labor?
I couldn't believe it. I don't, for those of you that aren't aware, misoprostol is a great drug for postpartum hemorrhage, right? In rural situations, it's brilliant for that, and also for terminations. But some bright spark decided to start using it for inductions, and they cause such overwhelming contractions that women have ruptures and babies die. We've had several big cases in the UK, actually. We had a set of twins in Tooting Hospital in St George's that passed away, and the mother passed away too. Oh,
Yeah,
here's our Namibian neighbour joining us. Sorry, Ruth, go on.
No, I was just going to say that I know that a lot of the women who are on Ina May Gaskin's
Yeah, on the quilt, that's right.
were as a result of cytotech induction.
That's right. Yeah. So anyone offering a pill to a woman for induction, that's probably what it is, right? I'm not aware of another one that'll be what it is. And they were doing that in our local hospital, and we have loads and loads of research and incidences, right, to stop its use. But that's what they decided to trial. So no doubt we lost some of those poorly babies, I'd say, which is why you'd want to put a baby under stress, under more stress. Who knows? Money, I'd say. Money. Kimberly, you're just down the road, aren't you? In Namibia. This is Ruth that I was telling you about. Just down from Cape Town, right? That's where you are now, isn't it?
Yeah, in a seaside village called Komiki. I'm about 5 minutes from the beach. Yeah.
Oh, I love it down there. And the last time I was there, I made a complete fool of myself because I went to Cape Point, and that my host was like, "I've been up there 100 times. I can't be bothered. You go up, and I'll see you." And I saw whales, and because that was like the first time I'd ever seen a whale, I started grabbing all the tourists. There's whales. There's whales, and they were all like, "Yeah, but it's South Africa. Of course it's there." I was like a child, like an overly
It's always very exciting to see whales.
I know, right? I know, that's
so
what I
incredible.
think.
Yeah.
I did the same thing when I saw one in Morocco too at a cafe, and it was so far on the horizon, everyone I grabbed couldn't even see it. But I was still there like, oh, in the UK, we don't see them that much.
Yeah, it's so special.
Any other questions?
There's a message here that's been written in the text.
Oh.
Can Ruth give details of the training for birth attenders she had in America? Is it still available? Thinking of so many granny midwives have been ousted in the Americas. This might be a way back for their practice. Yeah, so, I mean, the CPM credential still exists in the United States, and I know that there's definitely a big drive in the States to equalize the access to this training, because, I mean, you know, as we know, it has been dominated by white people. But basically, yeah, the CPM credential, I think, was pretty much started by the farm midwives. I mean, the application center for it is on the farm, but there are now centers all over the United States, and there's schools that have sprung up around it. And I know that there are birth centers that have, you know, sprung up in Black and Hispanic areas, which then support those communities and then train women in those communities. There's still a lot of work to be done. But if you look up the North American Registry of Midwives, all the information is there. There's also MEAC, which is the Midwives Education Accreditation Council. So they're the ones who kind of run the actual schools connected to that. But you don't have to go to a school in order to do this particular training. And that's what was attractive for me. So what you can do is you can find a midwife who is an official preceptor through NAM, and then you can just apprentice yourself to her. So you can then follow her in her practice, get to know the woman, attend births with her. So that's what I did. I just did 4 years of that. I was in 2 different midwifery practices, quite different, but both very beautiful and holistic, and obviously took a lot away from that. And then I also spent a year working in a Muslim birth center. We have a Muslim birth center here in Cape Town. And that was also a wonderful experience. I mean, obviously from the cultural side, but also just because home birth is so one-on-one, whereas in a birth center, it's obviously much more that you're working with groups of women not quite knowing who's going to be in labor. It's more of a shift type setup, and communication with backup was maybe a little bit more often than it would have been in a home birth setting. So that kind of thing I was really able to learn there. But yeah, check it out. I mean, it definitely is still something that's still happening, that's active, and not possible. It used to be that you could actually do the training in many different countries around the world, and there was an issue maybe about 7 years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, where there were a lot of American white women going to African and Asian countries and practicing.
Getting their catches.
Yeah, to get their catches, exactly. And yeah, the NAM basically realized, and I mean, you know, we're talking about places like Robin Lim's birth center, and Vicky, what's her name, in the Philippines. I mean, like really incredible birth centers that we know are very ethical in terms of how they're run. But then there were other places that weren't. And NAM realized that they couldn't keep tabs of how these programs were being run outside the country. But at that stage, I think I'd worked really hard to set up the whole thing here in South Africa. And so I was able to kind of put my foot in the door and go, can we just keep the South African one open? Because we're specifically training South African women, you know, it's not people coming here to train. We are trying to create a similar thing here, but needing to use the American model to create a foundation for it. And so we are still able to do it here in South Africa. So there's now a NAM CPM credential, which is for South Africa only.
Oh, that's amazing. Well
done.
Fantastic. Do you know Jenny Joseph, Kate?
Yes. So that was the other name that I was...
Yeah, she would be perfect because she's a black woman from London, but she moved to the States a very long time ago, right? 4 foot of locks ago. They're down to her knees or something now. And she's a preceptor, isn't she? I'm pretty sure she's
a preceptor. She's a CPM, and she's doing beautiful things. For women of color over there, definitely. Programs that she's running.
And is that place still there in Texas? A lot of people used to go there because
it's Maternidad de la Luz or something like that, and that's it's on the Mexican-Texas border, I think. And you do have to learn Spanish to go and do your training there, okay, but you can go. It's a year's worth of midwifery training, and then a lot of the women that you're serving are the women that are kind of crossing over the border.
So
a friend of mine also did her training there.
It's a bit mad, right? Because the birth rate is high, and people.
Yes, no, she said it was full on.
But you know, that's if you want to do it quickly. That's the way. It's tough, isn't it? Because, you know, I grew up with this understanding that you're supposed to watch 20 years, work 20 years, and then teach 20 years, right? And we don't have that accessible to us anymore. Although, you know, all the time you spent knocking about with your mum will have gone towards, you know, that for you, for sure. But it's hard to get that experience, isn't it? Unless you're lucky enough to be a 6-year-old going off with grandma or something. In fact, talking of that, we've got one of our wonderful South African members, Tando, is coming back to Cape Town, and she grew up with her grandma, who was a traditional midwife, basically, and she would look after women after they'd had the baby primarily. And Tando grew up taking soup and, you know, carrying babies as a child, and she's coming home. She's coming home, so I have to connect you guys together.
Yes, that would be wonderful.
She's in London, like, you know, fish out of water. She needs to go home, I think. She fits in, she's so cool, but, you know, I can see her happier at home for sure. Kimberly, do you want to ask Ruth anything before it's time to go, what with being quite close by? You got plans to go back to South Africa, or you don't know, maybe?
Oh, yeah, I really don't know.
No.
I'm like, I literally, somebody gave me the status of COVID refugee a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to just stick with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of them, isn't there? A lot of people sort of trapped and wandering the earth all over the place.
Yeah, so at the moment, I've kind of got, even though I've got to come back to actually do birth training with you because I haven't physically done it because of COVID and because I came here, I've got to come back for that. But I am thinking, because of the number of Sangoma trainees I now have, which is crazy, that I've got to go to my Baba, which is my teacher in KwaZulu-Natal. But she also does like a lot of Indigenous like birth work. And she has a creche and, you know, has birthed all the babies in her family. But it'd be really interesting to kind of see where the crossover is in that, like learning between like how the Sangoma traditional healers do it and how you might do it, Ruth, and whether you've got much experience with that. It'd be interesting. I mean, I know Sangomas aren't Indigenous to the Cape, but whether you've had much dealings with that, like working in the Cape, because obviously there's a lot of people doing that kind of work. Yeah,
Absolutely. No, there's definitely crossover, and I mean, even just working with the refugees and the refugee midwives as well. There's definitely, and I mean, here in South Africa, apparently, I mean, I had a meeting with the traditional doctors union head, just to speak about our registration and what our protection was legally and all of that. And he was saying that in South Africa, 80% of South Africans will always access a traditional healer before they go to a clinic. So a clinic is always a last resort.
Yeah.
So what they're actually trying to do is have traditional healers in the clinics.
Yes, everyone work together. Yeah.
Exactly. So the idea is to have a bit more of a crossover, because I mean, most South Africans are Christian, but they still pray to their ancestors and throw the bones. I mean, like, it's just, you do all of those things. Like, you cover all your bases, you know, in terms of your
more resources.
spirituality. Yeah. But KwaZulu-Natal definitely seems to have quite a strong traditional midwifery community. Because I'm in contact with Mama Mvubu. Is that who you're not speaking about Mama Mvubu? No. So she actually heads the traditional midwives in the country. So she's very much part of drawing up the legalities and the it's not training, but basically they want you to, there are certain things that you do need to know as a traditional midwife or traditional birth attendant. Sorry, I'm not allowed to call myself a midwife. Traditional birth attendant.
You can do that in here, it's fine.
I need to get into the habit, you know, because the wrong person might hear me. No, seriously, a friend of mine has actually been taken to court for calling herself a midwife.
How dare they take that word from us?
I know, it's
their religion and their institutions and their bullshit and
yeah, no, yeah. I could get very cross about lots of things.
Me too.
But basically, if you're going to be calling yourself a traditional birth attendant under this umbrella body, you do need to have certain elements of Sangoma, and one of them being that you need to know how to throw the bone. So you need to know how to resuscitate a baby, but you also need to know certain herbs and traditions as well in order to be able to call yourself
Sounds
that.
like my kind of midwife. Like that's I mean, that's what all of that, you know, certification did, was took out religion and faith and spirituality and whatever else we had at our disposal, herbs and prayers and songs and bells.
Yes.
And
so I mean, what I really, really love about the traditional birth attendant description here in South Africa is that it really puts first and foremost culture, religion, family, human rights is a very, very big piece that's tied into there. And so it really gives us so much more freedom to practice in the way that we want to practice, because you can just sit with the family and go, well, this is how it's done in private. This is how it's done in public. This is how the traditional midwives do it. How do you want to do it? And then we find our own way. You know, we really just go, okay, what does your family need? And then we obviously tie into it the basic needs as well, because I think it's very important to also look at, because it's also been interesting, because on the one hand, it's very beautiful to hold space for certain traditions, But then there are human rights violations that take place as a result of these traditions, especially of women. You know, very patriarchal, a lot of these things that take place. Or where the basic needs of the woman in labor or the baby's needs are overridden because of a particular tradition. And so it's also interesting to have conversations with people around, well, now we know that the best thing for the mother and the baby is for them to be together immediately after birth. And these are the reasons why, and this is why we don't like to cut the cord for at least an hour after the birth. And it may, you know, in your tradition, it might be, you know, that the baby has to be passed over smoke within an hour after birth. And I mean, that's definitely not ideal for the basic needs. So to really help them to look at that and then go, okay, maybe how can we still honor that, but do it slightly differently, where we actually just encompass the whole thing. And so it's really, that's the part that I enjoy, because I know every birth is going to be completely different. And, you know, I love the fact that on the same day I can do 3 home visits, and one will be like quite a conservative traditional Afrikaans family, but they're wanting a VBAC because they just feel like they got really messed about by their obstetrician the last time around, and they want to do things differently. And then, you know, quite a strict Muslim family, mother's completely covered, and all she wants is one woman in attendance, and we look at that. And then you know, a traditional Xhosa family from the Eastern Cape, and that will be, you know, in one day there'll be these very different flavors that I get to dip into. So it is. I mean, the other day we were also at a birth of a Muslim woman, and my partner, my midwife partner, and I were just saying, like, it's just such an honor, you know, the different places we get to dip in and out of, and amazing food we get to eat as well.
Yeah, I bet.
You get very well fed afterwards by happy, you know, grandmothers or whatever it is. Yeah.
But that's true midwifery, right? Maybe that's why that's your, because, you know, you should be able to look after everyone competently. Everyone doing this work should be able to do that. I'm remembering a terrible like ding dong in a family, and the dad was a Cuban Orisha, and his superior told him that he couldn't see the baby for 48 hours because they knew it was a girl. Like, I didn't know if the marriage would make it, but it did, and he ended up being there. We had to go pick it apart so much, you know, this understanding, because no one would have known it was a girl before ultrasounds and whatever else.
Of course,
And
yeah.
they were away from home, and there was nobody else that could have been there, and it was really difficult. And he went against his superior, which is tough when you're, you know, priest, essentially. Joe's got a question. So Charlie tells me in the chat box. Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. Thanks, Charlie. Hi, Ruth. Just something to share. I really love your book.
Oh, thank you.
Your little mini book. I just found it so profound, and I've started using it with clients just recently. And just something to share, my niece, she was diagnosed with gestational diabetes around week 30 of her pregnancy, and immediately everything has changed for her. Going into high risk, scans every 2 weeks, told she couldn't have a home birth, and everything you can imagine. But from 38 weeks, she was put under huge pressure to have an induction. And it's her first baby. She was really starting to struggle, particularly because her partner wasn't really on board and was getting worried himself. So he was like, look, you're so obsessed with having this water birth. Just, if the doctors are saying this. Anyway, I've been trying to support her. And yesterday she wrote to me saying, look, I'm really struggling. She was at 40 weeks. I'm really struggling. The pressure is so much. Anyway, I just sent her this page. That one. Can you see that?
Oh, yes.
That one.
Baby is ready to be born. Yeah.
Yeah, I just sent her that, and she wrote back yesterday saying, last night, thank you. That's really helping me. That's so helping me. Anyway, baby was born this morning.
Oh,
9:30.
happy birthday.
Great.
Wow.
And physiological birth, 6 hours. She's so happy. She's so happy.
And how big is this baby, if I may?
I don't even know yet, but they were saying it's too big, we'll have to induce. And then guess what? Last week, no, now we think the growth is slowed.
It's such a lot of bullshit, isn't it? Over
It's a load of bullshit.
years, I've only had one big bruiser baby with low blood sugar, and they didn't pick it up during the pregnancy, right? And all the other ones that they messed around with, it was just.
They are so quick. They are so quick to label with gestational diabetes, and I mean, I look at my first pregnancy with my 11-pound, 5-kilogram baby. And I think that if I had ended up in a normal healthcare system, in a medical healthcare system, I probably would have been bullied into a cesarean in the South African system. If I'd known I was giving birth to a 5-kilo baby, I probably would have been frightened as well, because so there is a beauty in a way of just kind of allowing for some mystery. And it was very interesting because when I had my third baby, I was living in Cape Town, and my mother was living quite far from me, so I didn't have her as the midwife. So I found a really wonderful midwife here in Cape Town, who's still a dear friend, and my backup hospital. So I had to go and make an appointment at my backup hospital, and they looked at my record of a 5-kilo baby, and then my daughter was 4 kilos, and then I was pregnant with my third baby, and they were it was with my fourth one. No, my third one was 5.5 kilos, so he was 12 pounds. I think that's how much it is. Also, no problems, birthed at home, slightly sticky shoulder, had to change position, out he came. Very tall lad nowadays, I mean, it's obviously in my genes. But what happened with the fourth one is that because I had this pattern of having these large babies, they actually tried to convince me that I had this thing called gestational diabetes and that I needed to have a cesarean. So even though I'd had 3 normal births with no issues and healthy, they tried to stick this label on me. And so it was interesting for me that it kind of went backwards for me. The first time around, it was all lovely and naive, and out popped a baby. And because often you hear about people having kind of a traumatic first experience and then protecting themselves better going forward. And then it was with my fourth where I really had to fight for this hospital to back me up, because at that stage my mother had passed away, and the midwife that I'd used previously had moved away. So my support network, my circle of elephants, was no longer there. And so that's when it really hit me what most women are going through, and how terrifying it is, and how they try to make you feel like you are being so irresponsible for making these choices. And it really dawned on me that if that had happened to me first time around, I would have had a very, very different birthing experience. So I'm really amazed at how, thank you for the space that you created there, and the trust that you were able to because it's really hard to push against that when you're so, at the end of pregnancy, you just want to hide away, and you just need the world to protect you. And if the world is not doing that, and you're having to, so she was very brave. Well done to her.
She was. I will. Thank you.
Such wonderful news. And those big babies, if you're active, like if you're at home, they just sort of burrow out. I always feel like
my bigger babies were easier to birth than the small ones.
Yeah. It's only when you're lying on your back with an epidural and all that nonsense that it's hard for them to get out, right?
Yeah, exactly. 5 kilos on that cervix, it's gonna open.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. It's hard not to, right?
And I've also only had in 12 years I've had one true case of gestational diabetes develop.
Yeah, it's very. I love the Hensi Goa article. Actually, do you know that? Have a look for it, you guys. It's called "Gestational Diabetes: The Emperor's New Clothes." They're just going through all of that to show that really it's very rare.
Incredibly rare.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we do. I mean, I think what is helpful about looking at kind of family history with anything, like if your family has a tendency towards this or a tendency towards that, it may crop up in your pregnancy. And so it's anything that crops up in your pregnancy is actually a beautiful opportunity to go, what is my body trying to tell me and how can I correct this? So if you have a tendency towards anemia or tendency towards not digesting sugar properly, or you have liver issues or whatever it might be, that's probably going to be exacerbated in the pregnancy because that organ is going to be under stress. But what a beautiful opportunity to take care of yourself and to
Yes,
go, okay,
yeah,
how can I nurture myself better here?
yeah.
And so they're just different ways to address these things or face them. Actually, it doesn't mean that we have to go like, oh, it's all bullshit, because sometimes it really is.
No, definitely. Yeah,
Um,
sometimes it's really happening, but just not as
mm.
frequently as they'd have us believe,
No,
right?
and not as extremely. Like I have a mother at the moment who is just borderline cholestasis, like it's just, but she's still working and she's a little bit stressed and maybe drinking a little bit too much coffee. And so it's a beautiful opportunity to go, okay, what is your body trying to tell you here? And how we're going to turn this around. And so we're working with herbs and we're working with diet and we're looking at what's happening in her life. And probably next week she's going to feel much better, because they usually do when they take care of themselves. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
And it's your liver. It's like it's so obviously working hard,
exactly.
every day.
Yeah.
That's another one, isn't it? Where there's a lot of brutality in the name of, who your baby's going to die otherwise. And it's a real shame. And I've seen I had a mum a long time ago, Indian woman, who took homeopathy for her cholestasis, and it worked so well. I just send everyone to her now. She tells them what to take, while still getting enzyme checks and whatever else. But it seems to work every time. So there's just no need for all these, like, as we all know, very brutal inductions often, right? Which ruin the family's whole life because of how they turn out in the name of saving that one life. That child is now here with a very difficult situation often, right? We've got a lot of work to do still, but it's so heartwarming to hear about what you're doing and how you're blending everything together, and sort of you're taking that word back anyway by renaming it, aren't you? And I like that I really think, and before I die, I'd like to see this happen for sure, that we have a possibility of doing that in Europe, which feels like the most important task ever, but the most impossible one. But that we should. I tried to ask Rachel Reed about it. That was my question, but she did swerve. She just swerved and didn't answer, because I think it's too bamboozling for European midwives to even imagine that we would have traditional birth attendants or traditional midwives. But we have the right, just like everywhere has the right.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just so crazy how this thing, which should belong to all women, doesn't belong to women anymore. Like, what happened?
No, it belongs to the fucking church still, really, doesn't it? Let's face it. Sorry, the government, the institutions. We've now got a Ministry for Women's Health in Scotland that's just happened, and I know, like, that was all kept very quiet, wasn't it? I only found out because an old friend of mine is now the Minister of Women's Health, and she's a birth educator.
Wow.
So I've got to go and plague her at some point, because I reckon that might be a foot in the door to start that work, like changing the word doula maybe to traditional birth attendant might start something.
Yeah, because we've really split it. We've just split it up completely. We've got midwives, we've got doulas, we've got lactation consultants, we've got this, we've got that, we've got this, and it's just, and then they put us all against each other as well, because now you're a specialist in this and I'm a specialist in that, and we don't like each other because you get to do actually what I want to do, and it's just, it's exhausting.
Totally, it is exhausting. And actually, what's the phrase? Teamwork makes the dream work. I know it's cheesy, but it's true, right? Oh, thank you so much for coming. It's been wonderful to have you. We'll have to have you again. Like, let's bring Ruth every year. Kimberly just said we've got to get you down the caravan. Like people go off to the caravan in Scotland, to the seaside. So we've got to get you down the caravan, definitely. I mean, I'd say let's take over a caravan park and have a red tent jamboree of some kind. I'm sure we can do that. I'll start looking. would be a total laugh, wouldn't it? Or do you
That's an
start looking,
excellent
you're in the
idea.
West Coast. Be fun. And Ruth, you'll have to come and visit us. I've got to come to South Africa. It's on my list in the next however long, whenever.
Well, I literally have a caravan park down the road. So
let's do it in South Africa then. Not in Troon.
3 minutes from the beach.
Let's do it, definitely. And maybe, I mean, I don't know, are you taking apprentices and so on yet, or is that just too much?
Well, I'm actually going on, it's my first time taking a sabbatical, so I'm taking a sabbatical supposedly at the end of July, but end of July births will spill over into August, and there'll be postnatal care going into September. But for the rest of this year, I am on sabbatical, and then I'm going to look into what I'm doing for next year. But part of the reason, I mean, I just need to take a break because I'm just exhausted. But part of the reason of taking a break is that the idea is still to find a piece of land, build a traditional midwifery school, build a birth center attached to it. That's what we're working towards. Whether it will be here, where I live, because there are informal settlements here that could very easily access that. And for me, it's very important to continue the tradition of my mother of, making it this accessible to all. So I've, even though the home births, primarily the home births I attend are obviously paid because I need to eat. I've always taken on pro bono, primarily refugee women, and so I would like this place to be somewhere where all women could come and birth. So it'll either be here, because there are some lovely projects that are kind of along that line happening in this area already, and there's a wonderful community around that, or to find a piece of land like proper rurally, and then to create that out there. So I just realized as well that if I'm just constantly on call and either at a birth, recovering from a birth, or doing the admin for a birth, or helping somebody with breastfeeding, that dream I wasn't ever going to have the energy or the time to really focus on that. So it's about rest and recovery, but also about kind of allowing the next step to be created. Absolutely. And then hopefully that could be a place where, again, people from outside the country, but also within the country could come and learn, and where we could also then bring these traditional midwives in to learn from as well. So
we'll have to get Ibu Robin to give you the masterclass on robbing the rich to support the poor whilst keeping love in your heart the entire time. You could have a little pipeline from Nigeria, because so many rich Nigerians come to the UK and have a terrible time. Like I reckon you could absolutely achieve that. But we need a break sometimes, otherwise you can't do those other things, right? It's only so much energy. I'm so excited by that.
Exactly. And I mean, politically, unfortunately, the birthing environment hasn't been so great in the last year. I think it was never super supportive, but in the last year with lockdown and COVID, I think the highly stressed medical system has just become even more stressed. And so I've just found that there's been definitely much more animosity towards what we are doing, and sometimes even direct attack. And that's been extra stressful, because it's already hard enough being up at all hours of the night, creating a beautiful, safe, protective environment for women to birth. I mean, I love it. I really, really love it. But then to be under attack while doing that is highly stressful. And so I'm also just wanting to, I suppose, take a little bit of a step back and go, okay, how can this be done differently? Because I want to do this, but I'm also not, like we said earlier, willing to go to jail for it, So
absolutely. Well, you keep us in the loop and let us know what we can do. There's 500 of us roughly.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
We could have the Scotland room, the Scotland sauna outside or something. Thank you so much for coming along, Ruth. It's been wonderful, more than I hoped for. Really,
thank you all
useful.
for taking the time today to be here.
Yeah, really amazing. I could listen to you for hours more as well. It's really enriching, because we're in this situation here where you've either got kind of real radical free birthers, or everybody else is dealing with the National Health Service, which is rapidly becoming like the state services elsewhere in the world. You get brutalized and ignored, and really not enough love at all. Often, not always, but the Call the Midwife days are very over, you know, so it's really nourishing for everyone. I think it is for me to know there's hope. Yeah, there's hope.
You know, where we are, we shine from our corner, you know, and it's always lovely to connect and to be reminded, like, because it can feel very lonely what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. But they're everywhere. They're everywhere across the globe, you know, and that's why I'm really trying to choose people around the world, because, you know, they're everywhere. Women like Ruth are everywhere, and right enough soon we'll reach tipping point. I'm so sure of it. I really am.
Thank you, Ruth. Absolutely inspiring.
You so much.
Lots of love.
It was. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care of yourselves. Bye.
See you, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.